What if the most important thing about money is not what you know, but what you have lived through? That is the uncomfortable doorway into the psychology of money by Morgan Housel. This is not a book that begins by worshiping spreadsheets, formulas, or market forecasts. It begins with behavior. It begins with the strange fact that smart people can do foolish things with money, and ordinary people with no fancy credentials can build quiet fortunes by behaving well for a long time. Welcome. In this first part, we begin with Housel's central claim. Doing well with money has less to do with formal intelligence than most people think, and far more to do with psychology, history, ego, patience, fear, greed, and the stories people carry around from their own lives. Housel opens with a contrast that sets the tone for the whole book. One person can be brilliant, wealthy, impressive, and still destroy his financial life because he cannot control his appetites. Another person can live modestly, avoid attention, save steadily, invest patiently, and end up with millions. The lesson is not that intelligence is useless. The lesson is that financial success is not a pure intelligence test. Money is one of the few areas where people with no training can outperform professionals if their behavior is better suited to endurance. A person can understand compound interest and still ruin themselves with envy. A person can study markets and still panic at the worst possible moment. A person can earn a high income and still feel poor because the goalpost keeps moving. That is why the book's title matters. The psychology of money is not a side topic. It is the topic. Money touches status, security, family, freedom, identity, fear, childhood, politics, and the future we imagine for ourselves. Every financial decision is made by a person with memories, wounds, expectations, and comparisons. The spreadsheet may be clean. The human holding it is not. The first chapter, No One's Crazy, explains why money beliefs differ so much. People are shaped by their generation, country, parents, income level, luck, setbacks, and the markets they personally experienced when they were young. Someone who grew up during high inflation may think about cash differently from someone who grew up during low inflation. Someone who invested during a long bull market may have a different sense of risk than someone whose first investing memory is a crash. Housel's point is generous, but also sobering. People do not merely study financial history. They experience a tiny slice of it, then use that slice as if it were a complete map. A person born in one decade may learn that stocks are a miracle. A person born in another may learn that stocks are betrayal with ticker symbols. Both lessons can feel true because both were lived. This helps explain why financial arguments become so emotional. When people disagree about money, they're often not just disagreeing about facts. They're defending the lessons that kept them safe, or at least seem to. One person says debt is a tool. Another person says debt is a trap. One person says take risk while you're young. Another says risk is exactly how a family gets ruined. Both may be responding to real experience. So when Housel says no one is crazy, he is not saying every decision is wise. He is saying financial behavior often makes sense inside the story that produced it. The investor who hoards cash may not be irrational if cash once meant survival. The person who chases upside may not be random if opportunity once seemed like the only way out. The danger comes when a personal lesson hardens into a universal law. The second chapter, Luck and Risk, complicates the way we judge success and failure. Housel argues that luck and risk are siblings. Both describe the reality that outcomes are influenced by forces beyond individual effort. We like to separate them neatly. Success, we say, comes from hard work and genius. Failure, we say, comes from mistakes. But life is rarely that tidy. This is not an argument against responsibility. Housel is not telling us to shrug and blame the universe for everything. He is asking for humility. When a successful person tells a story about how they won, some of the lesson may be skill, and some of it may be timing, environment, social conditions, or a single event that could have gone another way. When a person fails, some of it may be error, and some of it may be bad luck arriving with terrible manners. The practical lesson is to be careful whom you study. Extreme success is often fascinating, but it may not be repeatable. If one person became rich by concentrating everything into one risky bet, that does not mean concentration is a universal strategy. It may mean the person survived a path where many others disappeared from the sample. We see the winner. We do not see the graveyard of similar bets that failed quietly. This matters in investing because stories are seductive. A billionaire's biography can make every step look inevitable. A failed investor's history can make every mistake look obvious. But the future was not obvious when they lived it. Housel wants us to learn broad patterns, not worship individual outcomes. The broader pattern is that both luck and risk are real, and a person who forgets either one becomes dangerous. The third chapter, Never Enough, turns from uncertainty to appetite. Here, Housel studies the problem of the moving goalpost. Many people think wealth will finally feel like enough when the number gets larger. But if comparison drives the desire, the number can keep rising forever. There will always be someone richer, louder, luckier, more admired, or apparently more free. This is one of the book's sharpest warnings. The hardest financial skill may be getting the goalpost to stop moving. That sounds easy until status enters the room wearing expensive shoes. Humans are social creatures. We look sideways. We compare houses, cars, vacations, titles, schools, lifestyles, and the strange little performances people put online to convince strangers that breakfast was a major achievement. Comparison is dangerous because the game has no natural end. If you measure yourself against people above you, there's always another level. Someone making a good income compares themselves to someone making more. That person compares themselves to someone with fame. The famous person compares themselves to someone with power. The powerful person compares themselves to someone with more power. At the top, the prize appears to be anxiety with nicer furniture. Housel's point is not that ambition is bad. Ambition can build, improve, and energize. The problem begins when ambition loses its anchor. There are things worth risking for. There are also things that should never be put at risk for something you do not need. Reputation, freedom, family, friendship, health, and peace are not minor assets. They're the reason money matters in the first place. The first movement of the book, therefore, gives us 3 foundations. First, people are shaped by different money experiences, so their behavior often has a story behind it. Second, success and failure both contain luck and risk, so judgment should be humble. Third, wealth without a sense of enough can become a treadmill that keeps speeding up while pretending to be a destination. This already changes how we should think about personal finance. The question is not only, what is the best investment? It is also, what kind of investor am I likely to be when markets fall? What experiences shape my fear? What comparison keeps moving my goalpost? What would I refuse to risk even for more money? Housel is quietly pushing the reader away from financial theater. The impressive thing is not sounding sophisticated. The impressive thing is surviving your own emotions long enough for good decisions to compound. That requires a different kind of intelligence, self-knowledge. For example, 2 people can own the same index fund and have completely different financial lives. One person sees volatility as the price of admission and keeps going. Another person sees the same decline as proof that the system is broken and sells in panic. The asset was identical. The psychology was not. That is why advice must fit the person. A technically optimal plan that someone cannot stick with is not optimal for them. A slightly less perfect plan that lets them sleep, save, and stay invested may be far better. Money is not solved in a vacuum. It is solved inside a human life. The first part of the psychology of money is therefore less about rules and more about posture. Be humble about outcomes. Be curious about other people's money beliefs. Be suspicious of envy. Define enough before the market, the neighbors, or the internet define it for you. In the next episode, we move into compounding, survival, outliers, and freedom. The part of the book where Housel explains why time, endurance, and control over your day may matter more than chasing the most exciting return. Final close. Money is not just math. It is math filtered through memory, comparison, fear, pride, patience, and the quiet question of what would actually be enough. There is another quiet lesson in these opening chapters. Money behavior is often learned before it is reasoned. A person may think they chose their beliefs through analysis, but many beliefs began as emotional evidence. A parent's job loss, a family argument about debt, a lucky investment, a painful recession, a neighborhood where everyone displayed success through consumption. These experiences become the background music of financial life. That is why Housel's approach is more useful than another lecture about being smarter. Telling someone to be rational with money can be like telling a nervous person to simply relax during turbulence. Technically, yes. Thank you, Professor. But the body remembers things the mind cannot erase with one sentence. Financial maturity often begins by noticing the emotional history underneath the decision. The first chapter also helps explain why money advice can sound obvious and still fail. Save more. Avoid bad debt. Invest for the long run. Do not panic. These are simple statements, but simple is not the same as easy. A person who grew up with scarcity may struggle to invest because uncertainty feels unsafe. A person who grew up around abundance may underrate risk because life has usually provided a cushion. Neither reaction is random. This does not mean every behavior should be excused forever. Housel's generosity is not permission to stay foolish. It is a better starting point for change. If a behavior has a story, then the solution must address the story, not merely insult the symptom. The spender may need to understand what status is doing for them. The hoarder may need to understand what safety means. The reckless investor may need to understand what they are trying to prove. Luck and risk deepen that humility. When things go well, people are tempted to turn their biography into a law of nature. I worked hard, therefore hard work explains my outcome. I took the risk, therefore risk-taking is always the answer. I ignored the skeptics, therefore skepticism is for cowards. These stories may contain truth, but they are often too clean. The opposite happens with failure. We look at someone who lost money and assume we can identify the fatal flaw. They were greedy. They were lazy. They were dumb. Sometimes that is true, but sometimes risk arrived in a form that would have hurt many sensible people. A good decision can have a bad outcome, and a bad decision can be rescued by luck. That is uncomfortable because it means the world is less morally tidy than our explanations. The useful response is to focus less on individual trophies and more on repeatable principles. Instead of asking, how did this one person become rich? Ask what behaviors tend to improve the odds across many lives. Saving helps. Patience helps. Diversification helps. Avoiding ruin helps. A sense of enough helps. These principles are less glamorous than a heroic origin story, but they are more portable. The chapter on enough is where the book becomes almost moral. Housel is asking readers to define what is not worth risking. This is harder than it sounds because the culture around money rarely says, stop here. It says, more is proof. More income, more house, more followers, more respect, more deals, more visible success. Enough can feel like surrender when the people around you treat escalation as virtue. But enough is not laziness. Enough is a boundary. It says there are things money can improve and things money should not be allowed to endanger. If more money requires risking the relationships that make life meaningful, or the reputation that took years to build, or the sleep that keeps you sane, the question is no longer financial. It is existential. This is why the early chapters belong together. Your personal history explains why money feels the way it does. Luck and risk remind you to judge outcomes carefully. Enough gives you a stopping rule before the game consumes the player. Without those foundations, the rest of personal finance becomes a faster vehicle with no agreed destination. So before the book talks about compounding, saving, or investing, it asks for self-awareness. What did your lived experience teach you about money? Which lessons are still useful, and which ones are overprotecting you? Where have you confused someone else's success with a rule you must follow? Where has comparison made enough disappear? Those questions may not sound like finance, but Housel's argument is that they are finance. They determine whether a plan survives contact with real life. They determine whether a person can keep money once they earn it. They determine whether wealth becomes freedom or merely a louder form of anxiety. One more idea in this first part is worth making explicit. Housel is separating wealth from moral superiority. People often talk about money as if good outcomes prove virtue and bad outcomes prove personal failure. The book resists that easy story. It does not deny discipline, sacrifice, or skill. It simply says outcomes are mixed with circumstances, timing, and psychology. That distinction can make a person both more responsible and less judgmental. More responsible because behavior still matters enormously. Less judgmental because you stop pretending that every result is a clean report card on character. This is a healthier way to study money. It lets you learn from success without worshiping it, and learn from failure without sneering at it. It also changes how you might talk to yourself. If you have made money mistakes, the lesson is not, I am hopeless. The lesson is, what behavior, belief, pressure, or story produced that mistake? Was it envy? Fear? Overconfidence? A lack of margin? A need to impress? A lesson from childhood that no longer fits adult life? The mistake becomes information. And if you have done well, the lesson is not, I am a genius, and every future decision should be trusted automatically. The lesson is, what part of this came from good behavior that I can repeat, and what part came from good conditions that may not repeat. That humility protects success from turning into the seed of the next failure. The opening of the book therefore asks for a rare combination: empathy toward others, honesty with yourself, and discipline around enough. Without empathy, money becomes a way to judge people. Without honesty, it becomes a way to lie to yourself. Without enough, it becomes a game that never ends. The most powerful force in money often looks boring while it is working. That is the trouble with compounding. It does not usually arrive with drama. It does not kick the door open and announce, please clap, I am creating a fortune. It works quietly, slowly, almost invisibly, and then after enough time it produces results that look impossible to anyone who missed the long middle. Freedom. Chapter 4, Confounding Compounding, begins with a lesson that many people understand intellectually but underestimate emotionally. Compound growth is not intuitive. Humans are used to linear thinking. If something grows steadily for a few years, we expect the future to look like a simple extension of the past. Compounding breaks that instinct because the biggest gains often arrive late. Housel uses Warren Buffett as the great example, not merely because Buffett is a skilled investor, but because he has been investing for an extraordinarily long time. The secret is not one secret. It is skill plus time plus endurance. A huge part of Buffett's fortune comes from the fact that he began early and kept going for decades. The engine had time to run. This matters because people often search for the highest return while underrating the number of years that return can be sustained. A spectacular return that lasts briefly may be less important than a good return that can continue for a lifetime. The duller path may win because it survives long enough for compounding to become absurd. Compounding is hard to respect because its curve is backloaded. The first years may feel unimpressive. You save, invest, wait, and the result looks almost insulting. Is this it? This is the miracle? A few percent and a graph that needs a magnifying glass? But the point is not the early slope. The point is what happens when gains begin earning gains, and then those gains earn more gains. Housel's lesson is not only financial. Good habits, reputation, knowledge, trust, and relationships can compound too. But money makes the lesson measurable. The person who gives time to a decent plan often beats the person who keeps interrupting a brilliant plan. Chapter 5, Getting Wealthy versus Staying Wealthy, adds the survival rule. Getting money and keeping money are not the same skill. Getting money may require optimism, risk-taking, ambition, and confidence. Keeping money requires humility, fear, frugality, and an almost paranoid respect for what can go wrong. This is one of the book's most useful distinctions. A person can be great at offense and terrible at defense. They can build wealth and then lose it because the same risk appetite that created the fortune becomes fatal when the goal should shift toward endurance. Financial success is not just reaching a number. It is staying in the game. Survival sounds uninspiring until you remember that you cannot compound if you are forced out. The best plan is not the plan with the most impressive theoretical return. It is the plan that can survive recessions, mistakes, job loss, medical bills, bear markets, emotional stress, bad timing, and the occasional urge to do something heroic and deeply unnecessary. Housel argues that room for error is not a sign of weakness. It is the fuel that lets you endure. Cash may look inefficient during a bull market, but it can prevent foreselling. A conservative assumption may look timid when everything is rising, but it can keep a plan alive when the world remembers gravity. This chapter also introduces a barbell attitude, optimistic about the long run, paranoid about the short run. That combination is powerful. Pure optimism can become reckless. Pure pessimism can freeze a person into inaction. But long-term optimism with short-term caution says, the future may be good, and I still need to survive Tuesday. Chapter 6, Tails, You Win, explains why a small number of events can drive most outcomes. In investing, business, and creative work, returns are often dominated by tails, rare outlier events that produce a disproportionate share of the result. A portfolio can be mediocre in many places and still do well if a few holdings become enormous winners. This idea is easy to miss because everyday life feels averaged. We want every decision to look sensible, every investment to work, every project to succeed. But many fields do not operate that way. A few big wins can pay for many small failures. Venture capital understands this. So do movie studios, publishers, and investors who own broad portfolios. The psychological problem is that tails require tolerating a lot of ordinary disappointment. If a few winners drive the result, then many things will look unimpressive or fail. That does not necessarily mean the strategy is broken. It may mean the strategy is behaving exactly as tail-driven systems behave. This matters for individual investors because impatience can interrupt the tail. If you sell every holding that looks boring or abandon every strategy during its dry spell, you may remove the very chance for compounding and outliers to work. Patience is not passive. It is an active refusal to demand that every month prove the whole plan. But Housel is not telling readers to gamble wildly in search of tails. The tail lesson works best with diversification and endurance. You do not need to predict the exact winner if you own enough of the field and stay long enough for winners to emerge. The miracle is not constant brilliance. It is structured participation. Then, Chapter 7, Freedom, brings the book down from markets into life. Housel argues that the highest dividend money pays is control over your time. Not luxury, not applause, not a car that makes strangers briefly wonder whether you're important. Control. This chapter is the emotional center of the book. Money matters because it can buy independence. It can let you choose how to spend your day, whom to work with, when to rest, where to live, and how much of your life is directed by other people's urgent demands. That kind of control is easy to underrate until you do not have it. Housel connects freedom with happiness. The ability to do what you want, when you want, with whom you want, for as long as you want, is an extraordinary form of wealth. It may not photograph well. It may not impress someone at a traffic light, but it changes the texture of daily life. This reframes saving. Saving is not just delayed consumption. Saving is the purchase of future options. Every dollar not spent can become a small piece of independence. It can become the ability to leave a bad job, handle an emergency, take an opportunity, spend time with family, or simply avoid panic when life misbehaves. The irony is that many people trade freedom for the appearance of wealth. They buy things that increase fixed obligations, then need higher income to support those obligations, then lose flexibility. The visible symbols of success can quietly reduce the invisible freedom that made success desirable in the first place. Housel is not against spending. He is against confusing spending with freedom. A purchase can bring joy, comfort, or usefulness. But if lifestyle rises faster than independence, money becomes a leash with leather seats. These 4 chapters fit together. Compounding needs time. Time requires survival. Survival requires humility and room for error. Tail outcomes require patience. And the reason to endure all of this is not to win a scoreboard. It is to gain freedom over your life. For a viewer, the practical question is simple. Are your financial choices increasing your future control or decreasing it? Does your lifestyle give you options, or does it demand obedience? Are you chasing the highest possible return, or building a plan you can actually hold through fear, boredom, and temptation? The second movement of the book is a defense of boring strength. Save, invest, diversify, avoid ruin, respect time. Let good things compound. Keep enough flexibility that one bad month does not force one terrible decision. This is easy to say and hard to practice because the market rewards patience in a way that often feels like nothing is happening. But that is the point. A tree does not look busy while it grows. A strong financial life may look quiet from the outside because the most important work is happening in time, not theater. Next, we turn to the invisible side of wealth. Why the car does not make people admire you the way you think, why real wealth is what you do not see, and why saving can matter even when you do not have a specific goal. Final close. The goal is not to squeeze every possible dollar out of every possible moment. The goal is to build enough endurance, patience, and independence that money begins serving your life instead of quietly owning it. The compounding chapter also teaches patience at a scale most people underestimate. If the greatest gains arrive late, then interruption is costly. Selling too early, changing strategies constantly, or demanding visible proof every year can prevent the curve from ever reaching its powerful stage. Compounding is not only a mathematical process. It is a behavioral test. That test is difficult because humans crave feedback. We like progress we can see. We like evidence that our effort is working. A long-term investment plan may spend years looking unimpressive, especially compared with whatever exciting asset is currently winning dinner table conversations. The temptation is to abandon boring strength for visible momentum. Housel's warning is that visible momentum can be a terrible substitute for durable compounding. The survival chapter gives the emotional counterweight to ambition. Many people want to know how to get the highest return. Fewer ask what level of risk lets them stay invested when life becomes unpleasant. But the second question may matter more. A plan that doubles quickly and then collapses is not superior to a plan that grows steadily and survives. Survival also means protecting yourself from your own future reactions. It is easy to say you will be brave during a crash while the market is calm. It is harder when the headlines are ugly, your account balance is falling, and every confident commentator suddenly sounds like a disaster prophet with studio lighting. Room for error is partly a protection against circumstances and partly a protection against panic. The Tales chapter asks us to tolerate imperfection. This is a hard ask in investing because every loser feels like evidence that you're doing something wrong. But in tale-driven systems, many ordinary or failed outcomes are part of the structure. A broad index fund, for example, does not need every company to become wonderful. A small number of large winners can carry a large share of long-term returns. This insight can reduce shame and overmanagement. If you expect every decision to be a winner, you may constantly tinker. If you understand that a few outcomes may do most of the work, you may become more willing to let a diversified plan breathe. The goal is not perfect foresight. The goal is participation in a system where outliers can work for you. Freedom then explains why all of this matters. The point of saving and investing is not to become a more impressive spreadsheet. It is to create control. Control might mean leaving a job that damages your health. It might mean saying no to a client who treats every request like a hostage situation. It might mean spending more time with children, parents, friends, or work that feels meaningful. Money used this way can be quiet. It may not produce a dramatic lifestyle upgrade. It may simply reduce dependence. It may let you wait. It may let you choose. It may let you avoid desperate decisions. That kind of wealth can be invisible to other people, but deeply felt by the person who has it. There's also a warning here about lifestyle creep. If every raise becomes a permanent expense, freedom does not grow. The income rises, the house expands, the car improves, the vacations become nicer, and somehow the feeling of pressure remains. This is how people can appear successful and still feel trapped. Their money bought more obligations before it bought more independence. Housel's second movement is therefore a defense of time and optionality. Time lets compounding work. Survival lets time continue. Tail events reward staying in the game. Freedom is the dividend that makes the whole process worth it. The strategy is not glamorous, but it is powerful because it aligns money with endurance. For a practical viewer, the question is not whether you can find the one perfect investment. The question is whether your whole financial life is built to last. Do you have enough savings to avoid forced decisions? Is your debt load compatible with surprise? Can you hold your investments through ordinary volatility? Are you buying freedom? Or are you buying new reasons to need the next paycheck? There's a useful tension between the chapters on tails and freedom. Tail events reward staying exposed to upside, but freedom often asks you to avoid being overexposed to ruin. Housel is not saying take no risk. He is saying take risks that you can survive and avoid risks that can remove you from the game. That is the difference between volatility and ruin. Volatility is uncomfortable. Ruin is terminal. A temporary decline in a diversified portfolio may be the fee for long-term returns. A leveraged bet that forces liquidation can end the story. Mature investing tries to tolerate the first and avoid the second. This is why boring diversification is more profound than it looks. Diversification admits ignorance. It says, I do not know which company, sector, country, or idea will produce the best future returns, so I will not make my entire life depend on one guess. That admission can feel less exciting than conviction, but is often more aligned with survival. The Freedom chapter also gives saving an emotional purpose. Many people hear save more as deprivation. Housel reframes it as buying control. You are not merely refusing today's pleasure. You are purchasing tomorrow's ability to choose. The future benefit may not be visible today, but it can be enormous when life presents a fork in the road. So the second part is not anti-ambition. It is anti-fragility. It wants you to grow wealth in a way that keeps you alive long enough to benefit from growth. It wants you to respect time without assuming time will rescue a reckless plan. And it wants you to remember that the final reward is not a number. It is a day that belongs more fully to you. This also explains why Housel keeps returning to endurance rather than excitement. Excitement can start a financial plan, but endurance is what lets it matter. The person who can keep saving during dull years, keep investing during scary years, and keep expectations under control during good years has a behavioral edge that no hot tip can replace. One of money's cruel little jokes is that wealth is easiest to fake when it is being destroyed. A person buys the expensive car, the huge house, the luxury watch, the vacation that requires 12 photos and a small emotional press conference, and everyone sees the spending. What they do not see is the bank account after the spending. They see the object. They do not see the trade-off in real life. Chapter 8, Man in the Car Paradox, begins with a social illusion. People often buy expensive things because they want admiration. But when you see someone driving an impressive car, you usually do not think, wow, the driver is amazing. You think, wow, that car is amazing. The admiration attaches to the object, not the person. This is almost funny and then a little tragic. People spend large amounts of money trying to signal something about themselves, but the audience may be too busy imagining themselves in the object to admire the owner. The owner wants respect. The viewer wants the car. The emotional transaction fails quietly. Housel's point is not that nice things are immoral. The point is to understand what they can and cannot do. If a purchase genuinely improved your life, fine. If it is mainly an attempt to make people admire you, the return may be disappointing. Status spending is expensive because the hunger behind it is rarely satisfied for long. This connects directly to Chapter 9. Wealth is what you don't see. Real wealth is hidden because it is the money not spent. Wealth is the car not upgraded, the house not stretched for, the income not fully consumed, the option preserved, the asset quietly compounding. But hidden wealth does not clap for itself. This creates a measurement problem. We judge wealth by visible consumption, even though visible consumption often reduces wealth. If someone spends a large amount of money, we can see the result. If someone saves and invests, there may be nothing to see. Their wealth is invisible because it remains potential. Housel draws a useful distinction between being rich and being wealthy. Rich can mean high current income or visible spending. Wealthy means having assets, options, and unspent resources. Rich is what you can show. Wealth is what can protect you when nobody is watching. That distinction is especially important in a culture that confuses lifestyle with success. A high-income person can be financially fragile if every dollar is assigned to debt, consumption, and status. A modest-income person can be surprisingly resilient if they save, invest, and keep expectations under control. The practical lesson is to be careful who you envy. You may see a lifestyle, but not the liabilities. You may see the vacation, but not the stress. You may see the car, but not the monthly payment. Envy is often built from incomplete accounting. Chapter 10, Save Money, makes one of Housel's simplest and strongest arguments. Building wealth has a lot to do with your savings rate. Income matters. Investment returns matter. But the gap between ego and income may matter even more. If your wants grow as fast as your income, wealth has nowhere to form. Saving is often discussed as if it requires a specific goal: a house, a car, college, retirement, an emergency fund. Those goals are real. But Housel argues that saving without a specific purpose is also powerful because life is unpredictable. The future will deliver opportunities and problems you cannot name today. Money saved for no specific reason becomes flexibility for every reason. This is one of the book's most practical ideas. You do not need to know exactly what future you are saving for in order for saving to be useful. The unknown is the reason. A job loss, a health issue, a career pivot, a family need, a market crash, a chance to start something new, or the simple desire to work less frantically can all appear without asking whether your budget had a category ready. Housel also connects saving with humility. The more you need external approval, the harder it is to save. If spending is used to prove worth, every dollar saved can feel like a misperformance. But if you can care less about what others think, your savings rate can rise because your ego has lower operating costs. That phrase is not in every budget app, but maybe it should be. Ego has operating costs. Keeping up appearances is expensive. Impressing people is expensive. Needing constant visible proof that you're doing well is expensive. Financial independence often begins when the need to impress becomes less demanding. The chapter does not pretend saving is equally easy for everyone. Some incomes leave little room. Some responsibilities are heavy. But the principle remains. Wealth is created by the gap between what comes in and what goes out, and that gap is shaped by both income and desire. Then Chapter 11, Reasonable, Rational, adds a mature correction. The best financial plan is not always the one that is mathematically optimal. It is the one you can stick with. Humans are not calculators. They have families, fears, identities, habits, and nights when the market is falling and every headline sounds like it was written by a panic attack with a keyboard. A purely rational strategy might say one thing. A reasonable strategy may include more cash than a spreadsheet prefers, a mortgage choice that helps someone sleep, or an investment allocation that reduces panic. If that reasonable choice helps a person stay the course, it can outperform a theoretically superior plan that they abandon under stress. This is a major theme in the book. Good financial advice must be behaviorally durable. A plan that ignores emotion is not sophisticated. It is incomplete. It is like designing a bridge for perfect weather and then acting offended when wind arrives. Housel's reasonable over rational idea also explains why personal finance is personal. Two people with the same income, age, and portfolio can need different plans because their temperaments differ. One person can tolerate volatility. Another cannot. One person is secure in their job. Another has unstable income. One person has family support. Another is the support. The job of a good plan is not to win an argument on a forum. It is to survive contact with your real life. Reasonable plans make space for psychology. They recognize that comfort, simplicity, and consistency have value. These chapters work together because they challenge the performance version of money. The visible object is not the same as admiration. Spending is not the same as wealth. Saving is not only for known goals. Rational optimization is not useful if it breaks the human being required to execute it. For viewers, the question becomes direct. How much of your spending is for use, and how much is for being seen? How much of your wealth is invisible because it is actually preserved? Is your plan optimized for a spreadsheet or for the person you become when fear, envy, or boredom shows up? There's also a deeper freedom in these chapters. When you stop needing every dollar to prove something, money becomes quieter and more useful. You can save without apology. You can own less visible status and more invisible control. You can make a plan that looks less impressive but works better. This does not mean living miserably. Housel is not asking readers to turn life into a punishment ritual where every coffee is treated as a moral failure. He is asking readers to know the difference between enjoyment and display. Enjoyment can be worth paying for. Display often sends the bill to your future self. The third part of the book, therefore, teaches financial modesty. Real wealth often looks like nothing. It looks like the purchase delayed, the option preserved, the ego quieted, the simple plan maintained, the cash cushion that lets you sleep, and the savings rate that makes your future less fragile. Next, we move into uncertainty. Why history surprises us, why every plan needs room for error, why your future self will change, and why investing always charges a fee, even when the fee is emotional instead of printed on a statement. Final close. The wealth that matters most may be invisible to everyone else because it is not the thing you bought. It is the freedom you kept. The chapters on status and invisible wealth are especially useful because they expose a social accounting error. We are trained to read spending as evidence of wealth, but spending is evidence that wealth has been converted into something else. Sometimes that conversion is worthwhile. A safe home, useful transportation, a meaningful trip, or a tool that improves life can be a good exchange. But the visible thing is not the same as financial strength. This matters because humans copy what they can see. You cannot see someone's brokerage account, emergency fund, debt burden, or stress level. You can see the kitchen renovation. So the visible world becomes the model, even if the invisible reality is fragile. People imitate the display and accidentally imitate the pressure underneath it. Housel's distinction between rich and wealthy helps clean up the confusion. Rich is current cash flow. Wealthy is accumulated freedom. Rich can buy. Wealthy can wait. Rich can impress. Wealthy can absorb. Rich can be loud. Wealthy can be quiet enough that nobody knows what is there. Both can exist together, but they are not the same. The saving chapter then gives readers a lever they can control. Investment returns are uncertain. Promotions may or may not happen. Markets will not ask for your opinion before moving. But the gap between income and spending is more directly influenced by choices, expectations, and ego. That gap is where future freedom is built. Saving for no specific reason can feel strange because people like named goals. But unnamed savings may be the most realistic kind. The future rarely arrives as a labeled envelope. It arrives as a broken appliance, a parent needing help, an opportunity to move, a chance to study, a business idea, a layoff, a medical expense, or a desire to take a less stressful job. Flexibility is useful precisely because the need is unknown. There is also dignity in saving because it reduces dependence on prediction. You do not have to forecast every problem if you have enough buffer. You do not have to know which opportunity will appear if you have the liquidity to consider it. Savings are not idle. They're sleeping options. The reasonable over rational chapter is a necessary correction to finance culture. People often pretend that the best plan is the one with the highest expected value. But expected value means little if the plan creates so much discomfort that you abandon it. Behavior is part of the return. For example, holding a cash cushion may reduce theoretical returns. But if that cash prevents panic selling during a downturn, it may be one of the best investments in the plan. Paying down a mortgage early may not maximize returns compared with investing, but for some households, the psychological freedom is worth it. A simpler portfolio may look less sophisticated, but if it is easier to maintain, it may win. Housel is asking readers to respect the difference between a model and a life. A model can assume consistency. A life includes job stress, children, illness, aging parents, fear, boredom, temptation, and news alerts designed to make calm people twitch. A financial plan that ignores those conditions is not realistic. It is decorative math. These chapters also make the book more humane. Housel is not trying to shame people for liking nice things. He is trying to make the trade-off visible. If you know what a purchase costs in future freedom, and you still choose it because it brings real value, that is an honest choice. The trouble begins when spending is automatic, comparative, or driven by a hunger for admiration that the purchase cannot actually satisfy. The quiet message is that financial independence often requires social independence. Not total isolation, not arrogance, not pretending you do not care about anyone. It means enough independence from the crowd's approval that you can make boring, useful choices without feeling like you are falling behind. This section also explains why financial progress can feel socially lonely. If real wealth is what you do not see, then building it may look unimpressive. You may drive the older car, live in the smaller home, skip the performance purchase, or invest quietly while other people appear to be accelerating ahead. The scoreboard you are improving is mostly invisible. That is psychologically difficult because humans like social proof. We want evidence that our choices make sense. But invisible wealth requires trusting a private scoreboard. The emergency fund, the lower debt, the invested surplus, the flexible calendar, and the reduced anxiety may not impress strangers, but they are real. Housel's saving argument also makes clear that wealth is partly about managing desire. Increasing income helps, but if desire expands without limit, income alone cannot create independence. A person can always find a higher lifestyle to absorb the next raise. This is why enough from Part 1 returns here. Saving is much easier when enough has a definition. Reasonable planning then protects the whole structure from perfectionism. A plan does not need to impress the most aggressive investor you know. It needs to help you behave well repeatedly. Simplicity is underrated because it reduces the number of things that can go wrong, including the thing most likely to go wrong, the investor's own reaction. The viewer-facing lesson is not to become cheap. It is to become deliberate. Spend on what genuinely matters. Cut what exists, mainly for comparison. Save for the unknown. Choose plans that you can live with during stress. The result may look quieter from the outside, but it can feel much richer from the inside. There is a subtle confidence that comes from invisible wealth. It is not the loud confidence of showing people what you bought. It is the quiet confidence of knowing you have choices. You can handle a delay, absorb an inconvenience, help someone you love, or wait for a better opportunity. That confidence does not need an audience. This is why the chapter on saving belongs next to the chapter on status. Status asks money to speak to other people. Saving asks money to speak to your future self. One is immediate and visible. The other is delayed and private. Housel's argument is that the private conversation may be the one that changes your life. The future has a rude habit of not reading the forecast. That is the mood of the next section of the psychology of money. Housel is not anti-planning. He is anti-pretending. Plans are useful, but only when they admit that the world is messy, people change, markets surprise, and every worthwhile strategy charges some kind of price. Investing. Chapter 12, Surprise, begins with a warning about history. Investors love history because it is the closest thing we have to a laboratory. We study crashes, booms, inflation, interest rates, wars, recessions, recoveries, bubbles, and policy mistakes. That is useful, but history can also mislead when we treat it as a complete guide to what must happen next. Housel argues that the most important events are often the ones that were hardest to predict. The world changes because of surprises, wars, inventions, political shifts, pandemics, financial crises, technological breakthroughs, and social changes that did not fit neatly into previous data. If the biggest drivers of outcomes are surprises, then a plan built on exact prediction is fragile. This does not mean history is useless. It means history should teach humility more than precision. The lesson of financial history is not, here is exactly what will happen next. The lesson is surprising things happen, people overreact, incentives matter, risk hides during good times, and recovery is possible even after terrible periods. The danger is overfitting the past. If you study one era too closely, you may prepare perfectly for a world that no longer exists. An investor who fights the last war may miss the next one. A saver who assumes future inflation will match a personal memory may be right or wrong. A forecaster who builds confidence from old patterns may forget that the next shock does not owe the old pattern loyalty. Chapter 13, Room for Error, is Housel's answer to surprise. Room for error means designing your financial life so you can be wrong and still survive. It is margin of safety. It is humility translated into structure. This idea sounds conservative, but it is what allows endurance. If your plan only works under ideal conditions, it is not a plan. It is a wish with formatting. A real plan leaves space for bad timing, lower returns, higher expenses, lost income, illness, market crashes, family needs, and your own mistakes. Room for error can look like an emergency fund, a lower debt load, a diversified portfolio, conservative return assumptions, insurance, flexible spending, or simply not living at the edge of every paycheck. It can also look like emotional margin, not taking so much risk that you panic and destroy the plan during a downturn. Housel emphasizes that risk is what is left over after you think you have thought of everything. That is why margin matters. You cannot list every possible problem. You can only admit that the list is incomplete and build enough cushion to absorb what you did not imagine. This is especially important because leverage, debt, and overconfidence can remove room for error. When everything must go right, one wrong event can force a bad decision. The investor who needs to sell during a crash loses the ability to wait. The household with no cushion loses the ability to choose. The business with no margin becomes hostage to small shocks. Room for error is not pessimism. It is the condition that lets optimism survive. If you believe the long run is promising, you need a way to get there. Margin is the bridge between current uncertainty and future opportunity. Chapter 14, You'll Change, turns the uncertainty inward. The future is not only unknown because markets change. It is unknown because you change. Your goals, values, family situation, career, health, interests, and tolerance for risk may look different in 10 or 20 years. This is a difficult problem because long-term planning requires imagining a future self. But we often underestimate how much that future self will differ from the person making the plan today. A young person may plan for maximum career ambition and later value time. Someone may choose a lifestyle, job, or financial strategy that fits one phase of life and becomes a cage in another. Housel's advice is to avoid extreme ends of planning. Extreme commitment can leave no room for change. If you design a life that only works if you never change your mind, you may trap yourself. Flexibility has value because it gives your future self options. This does not mean never commit. Marriage, family, career, investing, and saving all require commitment. But wise commitment leaves some room for adaptation. Avoiding irreversible decisions when possible, saving more than the minimum, keeping lifestyle manageable, and not tying identity too tightly to one plan can all help. The chapter also explains why regret can be so painful. You make decisions with one version of yourself, then another version has to live with them. The earlier self may have wanted status, excitement, or intensity. The later self may want peace, health, or time. A good financial life respects the fact that the self is not fixed. Chapter 15, Nothing's Free, gives investing one of its best metaphors. Every investment return has a price. Sometimes the price is obvious, like a fee. Sometimes it is hidden, like volatility, uncertainty, regret, boredom, and fear. The mistake is treating market volatility as a fine or punishment rather than as the fee required for long-term returns. This idea is powerful because it changes the emotional meaning of downturns. If you see volatility as a fine, you feel wronged. You think something has gone badly that should not have happened. If you see volatility as a fee, you understand that it is part of the deal. You're paying for the possibility of higher long-term returns. The amusement park charges admission before the ride. Markets often charge during the ride, when your stomach is already reconsidering your life choices. The fee is uncertainty. The fee is watching prices fall. The fee is not knowing whether this decline is normal turbulence or something worse. The fee is staying patient when patience feels foolish. Many people try to avoid the fee by timing the market, jumping in and out, or seeking returns without discomfort. Housel's warning is that attempts to avoid the fee can create larger costs. If you want the reward, you must accept the price. Not every price is worth paying, but pretending there is no price is dangerous. Together, these chapters form a practical philosophy of uncertainty. Study history, but do not worship it. Make plans, but include margin. Commit, but leave flexibility. Seek returns, but understand the emotional fee. For viewers, this part asks several hard questions. Could your plan survive being wrong? Are your expectations flexible enough for a future you who may want different things? Do you have enough room for error, or are you relying on everything going right? When volatility arrives, will you treat it as proof of failure or as the fee you already agreed to pay? This is where personal finance becomes less about precision and more about resilience. Precision says, here is exactly what will happen. Resilience says, I do not know exactly what will happen, so I will build a life that can handle a range of outcomes. Housel's tone is realistic, not gloomy. The future can be wonderful. Compounding can work. Markets can reward patience. Careers can grow. Opportunities can appear. But optimism without margin is fragile. Optimism with room for error can endure long enough to benefit from the good surprises as well as survive the bad ones. In the next episode, we look at why people play different money games, why pessimism sounds smarter than optimism, why stories can overpower evidence, and how Housel pulls the book's lessons together. Final close. The future will surprise you, and you will surprise yourself. A good money plan leaves enough room for both. The uncertainty chapters are also a critique of overconfidence. In finance, confidence is often rewarded socially before it is rewarded by reality. The person with a precise forecast sounds useful. The person who says, I do not know, sounds evasive. Yet humility may be the more accurate position. The future is not unknown because we have failed to find the perfect expert. It is unknown because the world is complex. History can help by revealing recurring human behaviors. People get greedy. People panic. Debt can amplify weakness. Innovation can create abundance. Incentives matter. Narratives can detach from reality. These are useful lessons. But history cannot provide a complete script because the characters, tools, policies, technologies, and shocks keep changing. That is why room for error is not optional. If you accept that surprise is normal, margin becomes a form of honesty. It says, I have a plan and I know the plan is incomplete. It says, I believe in the long run, and I refuse to make my survival depend on perfect short-term conditions. A lack of margin often hides during good times. When income is steady, markets are rising, and credit is available, fragility can look like confidence. The household with high debt looks successful. The investor with leverage looks brilliant. The business with no cushion looks efficient. Then conditions change, and what looked efficient is revealed as brittle. Margin can feel wasteful when nothing is going wrong. That is the whole point. Insurance feels wasteful until the event. Cash feels lazy until opportunity or crisis. Conservative assumptions feel gloomy until the optimistic forecast fails. Housel wants readers to understand that the value of safety is usually invisible until it is needed. The chapter about changing also asks for compassion toward your future self. People often make permanent decisions in temporary moods. They assume today's ambition, risk tolerance, career desire, or lifestyle preference will last forever. Sometimes it does. Often it does not. A wise financial life avoids locking every door before the future self arrives. This is one reason savings and low fixed costs are so valuable. They create the ability to change. A person with a high savings rate and manageable obligations can switch paths more easily than someone whose lifestyle requires uninterrupted maximum income. Flexibility is not indecision. It is respect for the fact that life has seasons. The fee metaphor in Nothing's Free may be one of the most useful emotional tools in the book. Volatility hurts less when it is understood as part of the bargain. It still hurts, of course. Watching money decline is not a spa treatment, but the meaning changes. Instead of thinking something is broken, you can think this is the cost of admission for an asset class that has historically rewarded patience. That does not mean every fee is worth paying. Some investments charge too much risk for too little expected reward. Some strategies are too complex, too leveraged, or too dependent on perfect behavior. Housel's point is not pay any price. It is know the price before you enter, and do not act shocked when the bill arrives. The practical result is a calmer plan. You can expect surprise without trying to predict its exact form. You can hold margin without apologizing for inefficiency. You can give your future self options. You can treat volatility as a known fee rather than an insult. This is not a plan for certainty. It is a plan for adulthood. The uncertainty section also connects to regret. People often imagine the pain of missing upside more vividly than the pain of being financially trapped. During rising markets, margin can feel like a drag. Cash feels foolish. Conservative assumptions feel like a failure of imagination. Then the cycle turns, and the same margin becomes dignity. That dignity matters. A person with room for error can make decisions slowly. A person without it may be forced to decide at the worst possible moment. Selling during a panic, borrowing under pressure, staying in a harmful job, or accepting a bad deal can all be consequences of having no margin. The cost of fragility is not only financial. It is emotional and practical. The chapter about changing future selves is equally important for career and lifestyle choices. It is easy to build a life around maximum income when you're young and energetic. But later, time, health, family, autonomy, or meaning may become more important. If every expense assumes the old priority will last forever, the future self has little room to breathe. Nothing's Free brings the lesson back to investing discipline. The market's fee is not always charged when you feel prepared. It may arrive after a long day, during a family stress, or while the news is shouting. This is why the plan must be accepted in advance. If you only decide whether volatility is tolerable after it arrives, you may negotiate with fear when fear has all the leverage. The best preparation is to choose a level of risk whose fee you can actually pay, not the fee someone else can pay, not the fee that looks optimal in a model, the fee you can pay without abandoning the plan. That is the difference between knowing about volatility and being prepared for it. The practical discipline is to pre-commit to humility. Before the surprise arrives, decide that surprises are part of the system. Before the downer arrives, decide what level of decline you can live with. Before your future self changes, avoid building a life that depends on one permanent identity. Before the fee arrives, decide whether the expected reward is worth paying for. This is also why Housel's advice can look conservative while still being optimistic. He is optimistic enough to believe in long-term progress, compounding, and human adaptability. He is conservative enough to know that none of those benefits help you if you are forced out too early. The margin is what lets the optimism breathe. So when a plan includes cash, diversification, modest assumptions, and flexibility, it is not necessarily timid. It may be ambitious in a more durable way. It says, I want the future's upside, and I am willing to build a structure strong enough to wait for it. That is a very different attitude from chasing upside, while secretly depending on perfect conditions. One reason money advice causes so much confusion is that people keep taking advice from players in a different game. A day trader, a retiree, a founder, a young saver, a pension fund, a gambler, a family trying to buy a house, and a billionaire protecting a fortune may all use the same words: risk, return, opportunity, safety, value. But they may mean very different things because they're playing very different games. Chapter 16, You and Me, explains that people can make different financial choices because their goals, time horizons, constraints, and incentives differ. A price that looks insane to one investor may make sense to another who has a shorter time horizon or a different game entirely. This matters because financial media often mixes everyone together. Long-term investors hear from short-term traders. People saving for retirement watch people speculating for the next quarter. A cautious household compares itself to someone taking risks with money they can afford to lose. The result is confusion. You start judging your game by someone else's scoreboard. Housel's warning is simple. Know what game you are playing. If your goal is long-term independence, then a short-term trader's excitement may be irrelevant. If your time horizon is decades, today's market drama may not deserve the emotional power it gets. If you need stability, someone else's aggressive strategy may be completely inappropriate even if it works for them. This is a liberating idea because it reduces envy and panic. You do not need to copy every successful person. You need a plan that fits your goals, temperament, horizon, responsibilities, and definition of enough. The fact that someone else won a different game does not mean you're losing yours. Chapter 17, The Seduction of Pessimism, explains why bad news often sounds smarter than good news. Pessimism appears intellectually serious. It sounds like someone has seen through the illusion. Optimism, by contrast, can sound naive even when it is grounded in long-term evidence. There are reasons for this. Losses hurt immediately. Threats demand attention. Bad news often arrives suddenly, while progress happens slowly. A recession can be announced in headlines. The gradual improvement of technology, medicine, productivity, and living standards is harder to dramatize. Decline has a press release. Progress has a schedule. Housel is not saying pessimists are always wrong. Bad things happen. Risk is real. Markets crash. Economies break. People suffer. The point is that pessimism can be more persuasive than it deserves because it sounds protective. It tells us, I'm the adult in the room. Optimism has to work harder because it asks for patience. The mature position is not blind optimism. It is the same barbell attitude from earlier. Expect problems, prepare for setbacks, and still recognize that long-term progress is possible. You can be paranoid about what can go wrong this year and optimistic about what humans can build over decades. Chapter 18, When You'll Believe Anything, turns to stories. Housel argues that the more we want something to be true, the more vulnerable we become to a story that says it is true. This is dangerous in money because money already touches hope, fear, status, and identity. People need stories because the world is complex. A good story connects dots, reduces uncertainty, and gives us a feeling of control. but stories can also outrun evidence. In markets, a narrative can make prices feel justified. In personal finance, a narrative can make a risky decision feel like destiny. In politics and economics, a narrative can turn incomplete information into total confidence. The problem is not that stories are bad. Housel himself is a storyteller. The problem is unearned certainty. We form a complete picture of the world from partial information, then forget how partial it is. We fill gaps with assumptions and call the result reality. The antidote is humility. Ask what you do not know. Ask what would have to be true for your story to be wrong. Ask whether you believe something because evidence supports it or because it gives you comfort, status, or permission to do what you already wanted. Chapter 19, All Together Now, gathers the book's lessons into practical principles. Housel emphasizes humility when things go well and forgiveness when they go badly. He recommends saving like a pessimist and investing like an optimist. He values independence, room for error, endurance, and a plan you can stick with. The rules are simple on the surface, but they are not shallow. Be less impressed by visible consumption. Increase your savings rate. Avoid the moving goalpost. Respect uncertainty. Do not risk what you need for what you do not need. Define the game you are playing. Leave room for error. Value time and control. Accept volatility as the fee for returns. The beauty of the book is that none of this requires predicting the next market cycle. Housel is not handing readers a secret code. He is offering a temperament, patient, humble, independent, realistic, and aware of human weakness. Chapter 20, Confessions, makes the book personal. Housel explains how he thinks about his own money. His approach is not designed to impress a finance textbook. It is designed to give his family independence and peace. He values a high savings rate, broad investing, low debt, and decisions that help him sleep. This chapter matters because it demonstrates the reasonable over rational principle. Housel is not claiming his personal choices are perfect for everyone. He is showing that finance must serve life. His goal is not to maximize every possible return. It is to build a life where money provides control, resilience, and fewer forced decisions. That honesty is useful. Many financial experts present certainty. Housel presents a philosophy with trade-offs. He is willing to accept that some choices may leave money on the table if they increase independence and reduce regret. In a culture obsessed with optimization that is almost rebellious, the postscript zooms out to consumer history, especially in the United States. Housel explains that people's money behavior did not appear from nowhere. It was shaped by post-war prosperity, rising expectations, credit expansion, inequality, housing, debt, and social comparison. Consumer behavior is partly personal and partly historical. This returns us to the first chapter. No one is crazy. People respond to the world they inherit. If a society teaches that a good life should be visible, financed, upgraded, and compared, then many people will behave accordingly. If credit makes lifestyle expansion easy, the future may quietly be borrowed to decorate the present. The postscript does not remove responsibility. It adds context. Personal choices matter, but choices happen inside culture, incentives, advertising, policy, memory, and expectation. Understanding that context makes the book more humane. It also makes the need for personal clarity more urgent. So what is the full message of the psychology of money? It is that financial success is not about becoming the smartest person in the room. It is about behaving in ways that let time, humility, and endurance work for you. It is about avoiding ruin. It is about knowing when you have enough. It is about understanding your own game. It is about saving for a future you cannot fully predict. It is about valuing freedom over applause. The book's advice is simple enough to repeat, and hard enough to spend a lifetime practicing. Spend less than you earn. Save. Invest. Be patient. Avoid catastrophic risk. Do not let envy run the budget. Do not let headlines run the portfolio. Do not copy people whose goals are not yours. Do not risk reputation, freedom, or family for a little more status. For a viewer, the final reflection is personal. What is your money actually for? Is it for admiration, security, freedom, family, options, a number on a screen, revenge against an old insecurity, proof that you have made it? Until that question is clear, more money may only amplify confusion. Housel does not ask readers to hate money. He asks them to put it in its place. Money is a tool for building a life with more control, dignity, resilience, generosity, and peace. When it becomes a scoreboard for ego, it can never be enough. When it becomes a servant of freedom, even modest wealth can become powerful. Thank you for watching this full summary of The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. If one idea stays with you, make it this: the best financial plan is not the one that looks most impressive. It is the one that lets you survive uncertainty, sleep at night, stay patient, and live according to a definition of enough that actually belongs to you. Final close. Know your game. Protect your independence. Respect the future surprises. And remember that wealth is not only what you accumulate. It is what your money allows you to stop worrying about. The idea of different games is especially important in the age of constant financial commentary. The internet collapses every time horizon into the same feed. A trader's urgent warning, a retiree's income strategy, a founder's concentrated risk, a young investor's index fund patience, and a speculator's jackpot story can all appear next to each other as if they belong in the same conversation. They do not. Knowing your game protects you from borrowing someone else's emotions. If someone with a 1-week horizon is panicking, that may not matter to a person with a 30-year horizon. If someone with enormous wealth takes a risky side bet, that may not be a model for someone building their first emergency fund. If someone is optimizing for status, their choices may be useless for someone optimizing for independence. The pessimism chapter explains why staying with your own game is emotionally hard. Bad news is vivid. It feels responsible. It travels quickly. A warning sounds smarter than a patient reminder that progress can continue. Housel does not ask readers to ignore bad news. He asks them to understand its persuasive advantage. This is useful because markets and economies are always giving people reasons to quit. There is always a recession risk, a political risk, a valuation risk, a technology risk, a war risk, an inflation risk, or a new phrase invented to make ordinary uncertainty sound freshly terrifying. Some risks become real. Many pass. The long-term investor needs a way to respect risk without becoming owned by every headline. The belief chapter adds another layer. People do not only believe what is true, they often believe what helps them make sense of uncertainty. A story that promises quick wealth, certain doom, permanent safety, or secret knowledge can become attractive because it reduces anxiety. The more uncertain the world feels, the more valuable a confident story becomes. That is why Housel's final principles are deliberately humble. Save more than you think you need. Leave room for error. Be kind to yourself when outcomes are bad and humble when they are good. Use money to gain control over your time. Do not let comparison define your needs. Accept that volatility is a fee. Avoid games you do not understand or cannot afford to play. These principles may sound plain, but plain is part of the strength. A lot of financial damage comes from the belief that the answer must be complicated because the world is complicated. Housel's answer is that behaviorally durable simplicity can be more powerful than fragile sophistication. The Confessions chapter reinforces that money is personal. Housel's own choices are shaped by what he values: independence, family security, low stress, and the ability to sleep. Someone else might choose differently. The point is not to copy him exactly. The point is to make your own financial choices serve your actual life, not someone else's idea of optimization. The postscript widens the lens by showing that consumers are shaped by history. Expectations rise. Credit expands. Inequality changes comparison. A society develops stories about what a normal life should include, and then families try to live up to those stories, sometimes with money they do not yet have. This context makes individual behavior easier to understand, but it also shows why personal clarity is necessary. In the end, the psychology of money is powerful because it lowers the temperature. It does not promise certainty. It does not flatter readers with secret genius. It says that ordinary behaviors, repeated for a long time, can be extraordinary. Spend less than you earn, invest with patience, keep enough room for error, avoid ruin, and remember why money matters. The final test is whether money improves the quality of your life. Does it buy time? Does it reduce fragility? Does it help you care for people? Does it let you make decisions from values rather than panic? Does it give you enough independence to avoid becoming a servant to every paycheck, market mood, or status contest? If the answer is yes, then money is doing its job. If the answer is no, then more money alone may not fix the problem. It may only make the same psychology more expensive. The final section also shows why Housel's book has reached so many readers. It gives permission to stop pretending that finance is only about expertise. Expertise matters, but ordinary people need a philosophy they can live with more than they need 1,000 clever predictions. The book says that behavior, patience, and self-awareness are not second-class financial tools. They're the main tools. This is especially important for long-term investors. The biggest threat may not be missing the perfect forecast. It may be abandoning a good enough plan because someone else sounds more certain. Certainty is emotionally addictive. A confident voice can make humility feel weak. Housel's answer is that humility is not weakness. It is risk management. The postscript's consumer history lens also softens the way we judge modern spending. Many people are not simply irresponsible in a vacuum. They live in a world where comparison is constant, credit is accessible, housing is expensive, expectations are high, and status signals are everywhere. That context does not erase responsibility, but explains why responsibility requires conscious resistance. The final rule, then, is to make money boring enough to work and meaningful enough to matter. Boring enough that you do not keep interrupting compounding. Meaningful enough that the sacrifices connect to freedom, family, resilience, or peace. Without meaning, discipline becomes resentment. Without boredom, discipline becomes entertainment. And entertainment is a dangerous investment strategy. The book ends as a reminder that wealth is not one thing. It is numbers, yes, but also behavior. It is assets, but also options. It is returns, but also endurance. It is what you own, but also what you no longer have to fear quite as much. The final lesson is also a useful filter for advice. Before accepting any financial opinion, ask whose game it serves. Does it serve your time horizon, your family responsibilities, your temperament, your need for liquidity, and your definition of enough? Or does it serve someone else's need for clicks, commissions, drama, or status? Once you ask that question, many loud opinions become easier to ignore. Not because they're always wrong, but because they may be irrelevant. A good financial life is not built by reacting to every voice. It is built by knowing the few principles you trust enough to keep practicing when the voices get loud.